Good evening, folks. Welcome to another edition of Grumpy Old Spurs. Thanks for joining us. First off, big thank you to everyone. This is a second show today, and I should imagine everybody's a little bit Thomas Franked out. But thanks for supporting the channel. We really appreciate, all the sort of support you give us. Hit the like button. If you don't already subscribe. Follow us on X, or if you fancy Twitter, at its Tottenham. And just trying to help the channel grow. So please do all you can to help us. I know people will be watching this on catch up, but still do those things, please. It'll really help. Now I'll be leading tonight's show, but more importantly, let's introduce the guest. So we've got now making his second appearance in the last 7 days. You're becoming a regular. It's the man behind the mighty Levynomics account on X. Connor, good evening, and how are you? You're on mute, mate. You're mute.
There we go. You think second show in 7 days, I would have learned that, right? Anyway, I'm good, mate. Thank you for having me again, and looking forward to diving into tonight's show.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, mate, there'll be so much content out, and more importantly, I think a lot of people will be after Friday nights. I think, was it Friday or Saturday? England were on, so I was hoping we get a few people who couldn't be bothered to watch that. But by the looks of it, mate, six in the watching us live at the minute. Do you reckon they've all switched on to that, or do you reckon they're watching the other channels?
Yeah, perhaps it is that, but we might get some more come on. I reckon as they get bored to death if the Andorra game's anything to go by.
Yeah, I mean, Leon might be joining us later, but tonight we're sort of going to get into probably a little bit of finance on how we can sort of what we can afford to spend in the PSR rules and UEFA rules and that, because as anyone who watches this knows, I ain't got a clue about that. So I'm glad we got you on, Connor, because you can sort of give me the idiot's guide, the idiot's breakdown.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's get stuck into the meat of tonight's show, the financey bits of our transfer strategy. I know it's not everyone's favourite topic, but if we want to understand what Spurs can actually do this summer, it's important to get our heads around the PSR and the UEFA's new squad cost control. So let's start there. Connor, can you sort of give us the idiot's guide on what exactly the PSR and UEFA's cost control regulations are, and how are they going to affect us in the transfer market?
Yeah, of course. So I think you're right. With there's two real sets of rules that apply that we need to think about. So exactly as you just said. So PSR, which is the Premier League's rules, and then you've got the UEFA rules, which are the UEFA squad cost control rules, which apply to us any year we're in Europe. So thankfully, after winning in Bilbao, that will apply to us this year. So if we start with UEFA squad cost control rules, basically what this is looking at how much we spend on our wage bill, how much we're spending on the amortization of transfers. So whenever we sign a player, you have to spread the cost over the length of that player's contract. So what are the charges we're having to recognise for that? And then you divide that basically by our revenue and any profit we're making on player sales. So I mean, if anyone is interested, you can see that I did quite a detailed thread on this that's got all of the details of what goes in and out and what the calculation looks like. But the headline really is based on the latest year, so 23-24. We are completely comfortable from a UEFA squad cost control perspective. As you know, obviously we've got the lowest wage bill of the big six. We even last year when revenue was a bit lower than what we'd expected to be this year, given last year we didn't have European football, we only played 41 games total. We didn't have as many non-footballing events. Even given that, we're only at 49% as a ratio, and that's versus 70%, which is allowed under UEFA's rules. So we've got a huge amount of headroom. And what does that actually mean in practice? I suppose if you compare that to the rest of the big six plus Villa and Newcastle, Aston Villa are at 86%, so they're well in breach of that threshold, which is probably going to mean that they'll be hit with some fines by UEFA, or there'll be some sort of settlement with UEFA where they have a number of years to get themselves below the threshold. So, Newcastle 71%, Chelsea 70%. United was 66%, Liverpool was 62%, Arsenal 61%, and City 54%. So we are by 5% the lowest.
So teams like Villa, sorry, Connor, to sort of put in, but so teams like Villa, will they be able to do that deal, like you said, to get themselves back into it? But will they still have to get rid of a player? Will they sort of like make them bring it down a bit? Will they still, obviously, yeah, like as John puts in the comment here, look, we need to be finishing above Villa this year, mate. 2 seasons they finished above us, I'm not having it. But like, will they have to? Will that mean they'll be able to carry on? How is it going to affect them? For instance, obviously, I know it doesn't affect us, but really quick, because nobody wants to know about them. I just want to, because obviously, I want to finish above them.
Yeah, of course.
I want to buy some of their better players.
Yeah. So Villa have got an issue from this, and they've also got an issue from the PSR, the Premier League perspective. UEFA tends to give clubs a sort of grace period to be okay, or fine clubs. And if you look at typically the level of fine that UEFA give, it's so immaterial versus what football clubs earn that, to be honest, most clubs just ignore them. So I suspect that I think Villa will not be able to spend like they have spent, particularly given obviously they're not got Champions League football this year, so they're planning ahead. But saying that, I mean, given the issues that Chelsea have, not from a UEFA squad cost control perspective, but from a PSR perspective, because the calculation is slightly different. We know that these clubs will just get creative with their accounting in order to make sure things are okay. And so, with Chelsea, obviously, they're the two examples of selling the hotels last year, and then this year selling the women's football team, which is actually, interestingly, following selling that women's football team has given them the biggest PSR headroom of any club in the Premier League, which is obviously complete nonsense. We know clubs will get creative, so I suspect when you see these news articles doing the rounds of, we've got a chance of signing Morgan Rogers now because Villa have got PSR issues, I'd be very shocked if they
had to go down that route.
Do sell anyone I think they will have to manage things more carefully. But there will be other ways that they get around it rather than having to sell their real star players, I'd suspect.
Yeah, because that's a bit like. Sorry, mate. Yeah, sorry. It's a bit like when people were saying earlier, a few days ago, we'd have to sell to buy. That's more based on the type of players we need in our squad, isn't it? We don't have to sell to buy to sort of like buy players to add to our squad. It's more to comply with different types of regulations, isn't it? Like non-homegrown and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, just to finish the point on the rules, the PSR, we also have got a huge headroom. So again, it's absolutely no worry. I mean, I think when I did the thread on the UEFA squad cost control, I predicted that we could spend £200 million on 4 players at 200,000 a week each, and still have over 40 million of headroom. So it really is not there. We certainly won't ever spend, given what we know of Levy and Enoch, but even if we were to get other owners in, given what most clubs would spend in that situation, we're never going to have an issue from a squad cost control or PSR perspective. So in terms of those rules, we're fine. The other thing that sometimes highlighted is cash and how much cash we've actually got to be able to spend on transfers, which is obviously different to the accounting stuff that applies for these rules. Now, on cash, there has been a decent size reduction in our cash balance over the last few years. But the cash reserves that we finished the year on just gone were still the highest in the Premier League. So we were 79 million, which is still the highest in the Premier League. So, I always make this point, right? And we are the only club that operates the way that we operate, where we have this sort of self-sustaining model whereby Enoch put in basically none of their own money, or very minimal. They've only done an average of 5 million a year over their whole tenure of 24 years or so. And it's almost a self-sustaining plus model, right? Because not only do we use the money that's made through the football club to run the football club is also used to finance property and the rest of the portfolio for ENIC. So, you know, when other clubs have run into issues with cash, so Arsenal's a prime example, their owners have just injected some cash either by way of a shareholder loan or by way of creating some more shares in the entity. So I think from a cash perspective, we're fine anyway. But even if we were to run into issues, we would always, if we had ambitious owners, have the option of the owners injecting some cash by way of a shareholder loan or equity to make sure that we were okay. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen under Levy and ENIC, and they'd rather spend £90 million of cash in the last 2 years on property, for example, rather than being ambitious. But there is no reason under any of these sort of rules or whatever that we should be in a position to sell to buy for sure. We're in an outstanding position. It's more around desire of the owners rather than anything prohibiting us from doing anything.
Well, and that's nothing new to anyone else, is it? I mean, you know, you've explained that now, but obviously what we really want to get into, mate, is the nitty-gritty. So based on all that information you've told us, how much can we, and do you sort of think we will realistically spend this summer? Obviously, new project starting off. I say project, that doesn't mean rebuild. I just mean new manager, new team, probably new ideas of how we're going to go forward. How much can we afford to spend? Are we going to be talking big money moves, or are we? Obviously, we know what ENIC in the past have been like, and you sort of go by history. Or is it going to be another year of smart business? From all those things, like your opinions on that, sort of what can you realistically see us spending? Because I think we probably still owe money for the transfers and stuff, don't we? And if the talk of what we're hearing, we're talking that the Thomas Frank payout was what, 10 million? Now, he seems to want to bring a fair chunk of his backroom staff with him, which is completely, I think you've got to do that. I think if you bring in somebody in, you've got to give them everybody they want, even if that's their analysis guy all the way through. So you could probably end up looking up to probably about 20 million, I'd say, with all those, with him and his backroom staff. So maybe sort of bearing that in mind, or what you've got in your head, what can you realistically see us spending, and sort of like, you know, how do you think how will that look?
Yeah, so I think there's, again, it comes back to what we can versus what we will realistically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what we can, or what I think we should be doing, given we finished 17th last year, and as you say, we've got a new manager and we've got a squad that has a number of gaps in it. I mean, we should be spending 200 million, in my view, right? And we would have the capacity to do that under all of those relevant rules.
Including
cash
sales?
Is a bit harder to follow.
Including sales?
Sorry, go.
Including sales?
Well, I mean, I think we need to spend about 200 million net, to be honest, to get ourselves to where we should be as a club. Now, I'm fully aware that we're not going to do that because of the current ownership. I think realistically where we will end up is about 100 million net is my prediction. I think, you know, part of that may or may not include Danso, which is already committed to, right, in terms of the obligation to buy, and maybe it may or may not include Tell. But yeah, I mean, look, there's players to sell as well, right? There's certainly players to sell in the squad, and we'll dive into it when we have a little bit of a deeper look at the squad. But yeah, I think in my view they should be spending about 200 million net. I think they will spend about 100 million net. But let's see, and I think there's obviously, you know, things to think about in terms of homegrown versus non-homegrown and club trained versus non-club trained, which we'll come on to. But yeah, I think we're in a strong position financially. So all of this any of this sell to buy chat is either because of squad issues in terms of you know, not the money side, but more the who's in the squad, or it's a tempering of ambition from the owners.
But like, so for instance, I mean, a player, I'll just give you a scenario. A player I'd love to see at Spurs. I know, say, a lot of people would, but I'd love Spurs to go and buy Eze. is that type of deal is extremely doable for us, isn't it? I mean, I think it was, like I said, this is sort of an idiot's guide you're giving me. I think it was extremely doable last season, going into a Europa League campaign. Now, obviously, like you said, there's players to move on because naturally they will move on. But that type of deal is well in our remit, isn't it? We should be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting nuance with Eze is he's got this reported
Yeah,
release clause, I think, of around 68 million. Um, when you trigger a release clause, typically you're required to pay sometimes all of it, but if not
yeah,
a very large portion of it up front. So there's this sort of immediate cash hit that you have with those types of transfers that you don't have with the typical type of transfer. Like when we
yeah,
signed Solanke, for example, for 65 million, we probably would have only been paying 12 to 15 million out in
yeah,
cash in the first year. So there's that to consider. But I suspect the way that they could potentially get around that is actually by saying, look, we'll give, if they're really worried about the immediate cash hit, just say to Crystal Palace, look, instead of giving you the release clause, we'll pay a bit more than the release clause, but we want to
yeah,
spread the payments over a longer period. And that's what clubs sometimes do to avoid officially triggering a release clause. So, yeah, I mean, look, Eze should be absolutely doable for a club like Tottenham. Wages wise, he's one of Palace's higher earners, but there's no reason why we couldn't give him a decent sized bump on wages and you'd expect signing someone like Eze, he'd be coming into Tottenham under the current model on sort of that sort of 170 mark, which is sort of where Madison sits, which would be an uplift from where he is. But you could even argue, well, why, he's one that should be pushing 200. So, yeah, it's absolutely a signing that we could, and in my view, same as yours, should make. But it just comes to the ambition of the owners.
yeah. Because I mean, I know we want to be savvy, and you have. I think more so now than ever. It's about smart recruitment and recruiting the right way. But you are still going to have that. We are gonna have to make we're going to have to make the wage budget bigger, aren't we? We are going to have to start spending more
So,
on wages, even though we've spent money on transfers. It's just the way football is that the more wages you spend, the higher you tend to finish in the league. And it's getting to that point now, isn't it? And we can do that, can't we? We've got loads of room to do that, and that's right, isn't it?
yeah, it is. I mean, look, I think wages are typically the biggest barometer of success, right,
Yeah,
for football clubs. And I think there's always exceptions and anomalies, and we got stung by one with Ndombele. But
yeah,
on a general rule of thumb is that if you pay higher wages, you're going to have a better squad.
yeah,
Um, and you're absolutely right. I think in terms of where we sit on wages, the total wage bill was 222 million last year, which is more than 100 million less than the average for the rest of the big six, which is who we're competing with. So, you know, to be that much lower is frankly ridiculous. So definitely we need to have a big change in the way that we think about wages. I think, to be honest, to your point, transfer spend actually since we moved into the stadium is there or thereabouts with the rest
yeah,
of the big six, with the exception of Chelsea, obviously, who have gone a bit mad recently. Um, but it's wage spend where we're so far behind. And I think I had this debate with someone on X the other day. I think, the reason why we often have these recruitment misses is because I think when we spend big money, we're getting the worst of the big money signings
yes,
because we're paying less in wages. So we're not attractive, so you go and spend 60 million. It's very different spending 60 million on a player and then paying them 200 grand a week than
yeah,
spending 60 million and paying them 80, 90 grand a week. You're
yeah,
getting a different caliber of player. And I think that's the issue. The two haven't gone hand in hand for us. And I think part of that is because from Enix's perspective, they don't mind paying the transfer fee because from there they get to amortize the cost over the length
yeah,
of the contract. So it's not a big hit to them. They've still got the assets sitting there, and there's potential upsell value if they manage to sell the players on, particularly when we're signing young players. But wages is just something that Levy has not really moved with the times on.
They
So
can't grasp it, can they? Because it's there in black and white, isn't it? And it's probably more pronounced, in social media and stuff like that. People talk about it more, don't they? That's been a thing when more people are bringing that up. So, but it just obviously doesn't, because he firmly believes in this belief of his, doesn't he, that we can do this by being by being run how we are, doesn't he? He must firmly believe that. I don't think he's not an idiot, but he must just have this like belief in him that we can do this by not spending that and being smarter but it isn't working properly, is it?
no, and I think there's probably a couple of points on that. I think one, I think the Ndombele experience has stung him, and
Yeah,
unlike other football clubs that get stung and just go again, it's
yeah,
sort of I think it's really impacted us. I think he naturally is very risk averse and is very cautious,
absolutely.
and to be honest, look, we talk a lot about Levy, but I try not to only talk about Levy and make it that broader Enoch thing, because
Yeah,
actually, in my view, in a lot of ways, I think Joe Lewis has historically been way worse than Levy, right? Because he's been the one who's actually holding the purse strings.
yeah,
Levy owns a part of the club, but he isn't the wealthy. He doesn't own a
yeah,
big
billionaire.
proportion. He's not the one with huge amounts of wealth, and actually, has just been sort of Enoch's person that's been the face of the club. But actually, it's Joe Lewis who's been really happy with this model, and over their whole tenure, they bought the club for about 94 million. Up
Yeah,
until the end of last year, they put in 122 million. So that's just over 200 million of total investment. They're probably going to walk away and sell the club for about 3.5 billion on a 200 million pound investment. It's an outrageous level of return, and this is why
yeah,
Tottenham fans that are critical of the model get so worked up about it, because even if they just put in a little bit more, just some crumbs off the table, we could have competed. And there's been times, throughout the last 6, 7, 8 years when we just needed that extra little bit of push, and that would have really, the Poch era would have really taken us to the next step, and they missed that opportunity.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they did. I mean, we can sort of wrap that up now, mate. Thanks for sort of like we've had that little chat, and we can, but obviously now we can sort of switch gears from boardroomy stuff to go back to the dugout now, mate. Obviously, the lads did a show this morning. Romano gave the here we go about Thomas Frank. It's not been made official yet. So obviously this is Tottenham Hotspur. So I am buzzing. I am excited about it. I mean, people who watch this will. I'll speak a little bit because I wasn't on the show Friday about the sacking of Ange and give my own personal thoughts on what happened at the end. But like Thomas Frank, mate, looks like he's going to be the man coming in. What are you most looking forward about this like next chapter, mate? I've got some opinions on it. What I've been sort of waiting for and leading up,
Yeah,
even leading up to him being announced. I was looking at other managers, and Thomas Frank's always been one of those I've admired, and I've got some stick in the chat. People moaning and saying he's boring. See a lot of these people now on social media are all changing their tune on him. Now they've had a look at it a little bit more. Now they know it's happening. They're fully on board. And yeah, they've always respected him and all that bollocks they say. But like, from what you know, what are you most looking forward to then in this next chapter?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, and I'm not just saying it to be a bit of a hindsight merchant, but I have been advocating for Frank for a little while, particularly when I was talking to my dad and other Spurs fans. For me, it was the obvious choice was either Glasner or Frank. I think
Yes.
in terms of,
Bang on, I'm with you.
and it became apparent, I think, that Glasner was less achievable in terms
Yeah.
because after getting Palace into Europe and
Yeah.
maybe wanting to see how that goes. So I think with Frank, I think. Look, he's done an outstanding job at Brentford. I mentioned this last time on the pod, but they were in the fourth tier of English football in 1998, and he's
Yeah.
established them along with the ownership, to be fair, at Brentford
Yeah,
and the model and everything else. But they're an established Premier League team that don't ever look at danger of going down, which is in itself an outstanding achievement. And I think, you know, for me with Frank, it is. I like the fact I think he comes across really well. Just
yeah,
I think he's personable. I think he comes across well. I think he's good at building that sort of connection with the
yeah,
fans quite quickly. I think he'll do all of that stuff. But I think his biggest plus is how tactically versatile he is and how adaptable he is. And the season just gone, he's top of the list for most different formations and tactical
yeah,
changes made out of any manager. Um, I think the problem sometimes when lower managers step up is a lot of lower managers have to, be used to just playing low blocks, and that's if he's the David Moyes, Sean Dyche type of manager
yeah,
where they can be successful at lower clubs because they just set up in a certain way. I think with Frank, Brentford scored a huge amount of goals
yeah,
this year, right? More than us. So,
yeah,
and he's proven that he's able to maximise very different types of attackers as well. So you had
yeah.
Watkins way back when, then he's gone to Tony, then
Tony.
and Wema and Vissa now, and they're all very, very different. And I think that's a good sign for us in terms of
Yeah.
his ability to make that step up, which obviously who knows, but I think they imply he should be able to make that.
Well, as we were talking earlier, like we were saying about the transfer model and stuff like that, at Spurs, you need to coach up players, don't you? We need to make the team better than the sum of their parts. Like we got Pochettino from Southampton,
Yeah.
And he made players better. And when you look at Eddie Howe at Newcastle, that's the sort of position we're in. So I just look at it and I think that's what he can do. And it's not always like, oh, I'm bringing my left winger on. I'm just going to put on another left winger. When you want to see change in a game, he has the ability to do that. And I think more than anything at Spurs, that is what you need. Kerry's put in here, what will his brief be? I mean, I've got to be honest, Con, I don't know what. The league ain't going to be an issue, is it? Because they will want to see improvement in the league. You're probably looking at them saying, we want European football from a league position. More than achievable. More than achievable. And like the Champions League is going to be tough. Very tough. And I think to put on his toes that, well, Ange won a trophy, you're going to need to do that. It's very unfair. So I think that you've got to sort of look at it, and a cup would be a bonus. I think we need a good run in the cups, a good run in Europe, to sort of like get the fans on board in the Champions League. But we've got to be finishing European places in the in the league, and you do that more and more. The continuity of doing that will obviously help you grow, bring more money in, hopefully win more trophies. Build to win more trophies. That's what we have to do. Like in a way, the sort of Ange model was unsustainable, really, wasn't it? Because you've got to actually win. You've got to constantly have that get out of jail free card with
Well,
him.
yeah,
So
that's exactly how I would describe it as well. Because I mean the challenge I think you've seen a lot on X and
yeah,
different social media platforms has been, Frank has got to win a trophy to, be. But Ange wouldn't have won a trophy this year either. The chance of us winning a trophy this year coming is so
yeah,
much slimmer by just virtue of the fact that obviously we're in the Champions League rather than the Europa League, which we were favourites for, by the way, before the tournament. We're not going to be favourites for any tournament this
no,
year. The League Cup, you need to get a nice run and hope you don't draw Liverpool, Man City, similar with the FA Cup.
yeah,
And then obviously the league and the Champions League is not going to happen. So, I agree with you. I think the brief has got to be, you know, improve the league form. I think they will. I think they will anyway. I mean,
it can't get any
I don't think
worse,
he has
can
to
it?
do. It can't get any worse, or hopefully it can't, because otherwise we'll be
No,
relegated. So that's going to happen naturally. I think if he can finish top 8, I think
yeah,
that's a really good outcome. Get us back into Europe, and then what you've got is the following season. you've then
Yeah.
got a competition that you can potentially win, right? Because I don't think we're going to finish top five. I think if Frank managed to finish top five from where we are now
Yeah.
in his first year, would be an outstanding achievement. I can't see it. So there's a good chance if he has a really good season, we're back in the Europa the following year,
And
or
that is a winnable, and that is an extremely winnable trophy for any club in this country that gets in it. I mean, like, I was going to, before we move on to Frank stuff, I'll come to it now, like, say about Ange, because, like, Kerry said, we'll never know, and Tony said that you've got no proof that Ange wouldn't have won a trophy. Absolutely made up that Ange won that trophy. He will always go down as the guy that won that trophy. And as a fan base, we will always remember. He'll always be fondly remembered now. But history will be very kind to him because over a period of time, people remember the first 10 games. No matter how, because people say, "Oh, we had a bit of luck or whatever." Well, you need luck, like we needed luck in the cup competitions, and most teams that win trophies need luck. So people remember that, and then they'll remember the amazing night in Bilbao. They'll remember that and winning that trophy. What people will forget and won't remember is the absolute pile of shit that was in between those first 10 games and that trophy win. And people stuck by it for a long time. But players regressing, performances on the pitch regressing, even though, like, people, the buzzword was, well, there's context to those losses. Yeah, right. But there was still no really excuse for how bad the performances were. That, like, players never got any better, and we sort of lost what we were doing. And even though we beat Man United, that tactic that we employed, where people say, well, he did change tactics, and I don't mean this, but that is very basic. Just sitting a load of people behind the ball and getting it ball at the pitch. Like, Frank's managed injuries before, but look, people have come around to it more now. If you look on the socials and people talk, they sort of know. People know now that obviously we're on the crest of a wave and the emotion was outpouring. But I think the more it settles, I think the more people know. Look, like Ange. Then when you say, "Well, give him 10 games," well, you're not really backing him, then, are you? If you're only giving him 10 games, and it's like the league form was that bad. Like, and I always said, winning becomes a habit, and so does losing. Now, it's all, there was context in the end to every time you talk about losses. And like I said, I think the way to look at it, that he will remember, history will be very kind to him because of how he started and how he finished. But ultimately, I think anybody that sort of looks at it now and, like, it won't, Ange leaving should not spoil how people feel about winning that cup, because they can't take that away from you. That's how you felt. That's how you felt with family members or friends or people you loved around you, or where you spent that night. They can't take that away from you. Like, Brennan Johnson will leave eventually. He scored the goal. Like, Ange is going. He was a big part of that. But, the football moves fast. But, like, what we're talking about now with Thomas Frank and your Glasners and, like, Areola, who had lots of injuries, they coped. They changed things. There was still a cohesion to how they played. If you look at people, like, I can't remember, there was a guy I was watching the other day, and he was talking about, like, Ange's pressing, saying how basic it was. It was just literally people running. It was a real everything was very basic. Well, we can't be dealing with that to compete on more fronts at Tottenham. We just can't do that. And
no, and I mean, look as well. I think the 78 points from 66 games is such a big sample size that you can't make excuses for that. And I mean, you just have to take it from Ange's own mouth. In an interview, he said that league form is the biggest indicator of how successful a club is and how well a club is doing and how well they're progressing, not cup runs. So he said that
until his
himself. So
league form became shit.
he's lived and died by that sword, hasn't he? And
ultimately, that is it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, on injuries, I think that some of them are up. There's an element of unluckiness. There's an element of how many injuries did the way we play contribute to. You said, I think there's issues with our medical staff, and
Yeah,
needs to be
which
dealt
isn't
with.
his fault.
But look, Brighton, I mean, I think I saw some stats the other day that more Brighton players missed more days through injuries than Spurs players did. And I know they didn't have Europe, but to be honest, we ended up playing a different team in Europe to the league anyway. And where did Brighton finish? They finished top
Yeah,
eight. Brighton in their first year of that manager. So, like you can't finish 17th as Tottenham. That's just unacceptable under any sort of measure.
and more importantly for me, Connor, it's like the defeats. You get beaten in football, but it was just the fact that and we had injuries, and you have an unchanged team, but I've never seen so many performances of an unchanged team where there was no. How many times during that time before he'd won the cup, and when the big swing was against him, sort of like when the first after like maybe probably at its height at the Alkmaar loss out there, how many people were saying we just don't look like we know what we're doing? It's just like bodies out there, and that's what a coach's job is to do. No matter who he puts on that pitch, it's his job to at least give them a fighting chance. And in the end, it didn't even look like we had a puncher's chance, did it? It just looked like and the worst thing about it is, and people, because you're taking this onto yourself. I mean, I'm not, because I never. But like people, what happened was people have just become accepting of defeat, haven't they?
Oh yeah, yeah.
We just
Yeah, yeah.
become we had just become accepting of defeat, and the cup final did make up for that in the end. It made sort of it irrelevant
Yeah.
then, but you cannot have that. Like he talked about changing the culture and everything, which people bought into, and he's a great talker, brilliant speaker, good man manager. But like he's talking about, people just lived on his every word. He's talking about changing the culture, yet we're losing every week. You know, people who are changing cultures or want that culture to be like that, they don't accept that defeat. They just don't do it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think the way to look at it now, because we'll move on from him. Football moves on quickly. Most people are happy with what's going on now. History will be kind to him. They will remember the start, they will remember the finish, and everybody will forget how awful, and let's be honest, how awful it was. So, so obviously don't really want to sort of go on to any negatives, but obviously with Frank coming in, we've said the things we like. Are you sort of thinking? Do you think the issues are going to be that he hasn't coached in Europe before? Do you think they're going to be like? Do you think that's going to be something he's going to really struggle with, or do you think he's tactically astute enough that he will learn quicker and he will be able to deal with it?
Yeah, I think there's always a gamble, right, with any manager appointment, and there's that gamble of, particularly when you get someone who has only managed at typically smaller clubs, can they make that step up? It's not just European football for me; it's that sort of weight of expectation.
Yeah,
Um, the fan noise, the media noise, all of that is just so amplified compared to managing Brentford, and we saw
absolutely.
that with Ange, to be fair, right? And it only takes, and to be fair, Frank has had slow starts, I believe, when he
Yes,
started at Brentford and in his previous job before that, Bromby, I think it was. Yeah, and you can see it, can't you, already, that if he has a poor first 5 games, even the media's suddenly on his back. The fans that were Ange fans are going to be on his back. So I think that's going to be a challenge to manage. The European football thing, to be honest, look, I've got low expectations for the Champions League anyway, given where we are currently. And so, I think if he manages to finish in those, they're
knockouts.
clearly not going to finish top 8. That 9th to 25th
Yeah,
position is it where you get the knockout game, have the knockout game. Hopefully, we get a nice draw, and let's see. I think, to be honest, it's there. I have low expectations for the Champions League, and I think in some ways it's a much harder competition, but in some ways for him, I think it's better that we're in because if we were in the Europa, he'd be expected to win it straight away in his first
yeah,
year. And again, it's that expectation point. So I think everyone is going to have fairly low expectations anyway for the
Yeah,
Champions League, and so
but
let's see what happens.
but with that,
But yeah, the
with that,
gamble with him
Connor,
is to step up, I think.
yeah, with that, like he's got this thing that where he made where Brentford, or I know it's a smaller club, smaller stadium, the fans would walk around the pitch like a lap of honour when they won and stuff like that. And he wants to get everybody on side. That has got to be a massive thing when we play in those Champions League games and against big teams. Now we need to sort of build that. You know, you need the crowd buzzing. You need that's what we need to build. So hopefully, he can build that. But like you said, if we get into the knockout stages, from what I've seen of Tottenham, the past 12, I'll be generous, 12 months. I totally agree with you. I mean, PSG's his first game in the Super Cup. That is like a baptism of fire, isn't it? You know, and really, when you look at the Premier League teams at the minute, you know, obviously with a full squad and maybe with a bit of coaching and different plan of attack against different teams and new players coming in, obviously we will climb up the league. But from what you've watched at Tottenham the last year, first 5 games of the Premier League are going to be tough because I can't remember looking better than many teams in the Premier League for the past 12 months.
No, I
Did
think
you get what I mean? So they're going to be tough. They're going to be, to start off with, we are going to be, the only teams we beat were like Southampton, I know, funnily enough, Brentford, Ipswich. We are going to be, every game is going to be tough until this kicks in. So hopefully this kicks in.
I think the one thing I would say is the structure has been so bad that
Yeah.
it's not going to take that much work to improve that straight away. You know, you tell your fullbacks to stop pushing into the number 10 position, and
Yeah.
suddenly you've got a more established, harder to
Yeah.
beat team straight away. You know,
Spaces
and
between
those gaps,
players.
the spaces between the midfield and the defense. You know, there's a whole host of things, right? So I think. I mean, the one thing that Frank has got massively going for him, I suppose, in terms of playing those bigger teams in the Champions League is what he has done at Brentford, what has almost been his bread and butter, has
Yeah.
been beating very good teams with a poorer team in Brentford. You know,
Yes.
I think it was maybe it was the 21-22 season, or maybe the one after that. They had the best record of anyone against the top 6. You know, that
Yeah.
was the year they beat City, and they beat us. Um, I think they beat Arsenal. Frank has won more at Chelsea away than any Tottenham manager combined
Yeah.
in the Premier League era. So like he does have the ability to set a team up to win against better opposition. So maybe that will work in his favour.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, he's got all these things going for him, and it's like playing up in those games. And I think the fans, I think if you're playing, say, somebody that's in the Europa League at home, or you've got a big game, which I think the fans get behind the team more, don't they? When your back's against the wall in those big games, so they will suit him, and hopefully, like you said, set us up when we go away from home. But yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to that, and like you said, it can't get any worse in the league, and getting the best out of players. We'll get new players in. Defenses will be covered. Do you get what I mean? Like the system, we won't be leaving players exposed, even if we have injuries. You know, like the football we were playing at the end was just sort of like 2 banks of 4, wasn't it? But obviously, Frank, if he needs to do that, he will do it. But he wants to. His actual ideology is he wants to attack and he wants to win games of football, doesn't he? Play on the front foot. And in the Championship, I know it's a different level, but that is a slog. The Championship is a slog to get through, and he's coached that with like lesser players. But I mean, so under Frank, different systems. Who would you like to see us bring in? Who do you think? Because they've obviously spoke about transfers and stuff like that. Who would you like to see us bring in?
So obviously we've been linked with Mbeumo, haven't we? Which is
Yeah.
I think to be honest, I think that might be a little bit of adding 2 and 2 together, and
Yeah.
because Frank is coming, I think it sounds like Mbeumo wants to go to United, so I'm not sure we'll be successful if we do try to hijack it, even with Frank coming. But that type of we definitely need to strengthen attack. I think that
Oh,
goes without saying,
100%.
particularly with Son is obviously on the decline and might leave.
I'd sell him.
Richarlison probably needs to go.
I'd
So
sell him, Connor.
yeah, what Son?
I'd sell Son to. We're making a new
Saudi.
start. What Saudi? You'll get good money for him off Saudi. We kept Lloris for two. Lloris was a fantastic servant for Tottenham, brilliant keeper. Kept him, and we were left with a version of Lloris that left, which will get unfairly seen for how that
I agree
finished.
with that.
And
I agree.
I just think if that time comes, let him go off, play in a league where he'll be better. Let's remember him for lifting that trophy, and because he will be a bit if Frank comes in and he does what he needs to do, he will be a bit part, won't he? He will be bit part at best, I think.
I think, yeah. I mean, look, if Saudi come in with a serious offer and you're gonna have money to spend, I think you sell him. I think if they don't, I don't think you. I think if you don't get a decent sized offer, I think he might be worth keeping as a bit part
Yeah,
impact player who's good around the squad still to have
yeah,
that type of and so I think they just have to weigh up what comes in for him. I think yeah. So look, I think we're linked with Embuemo, Semenyo from Bournemouth, aren't we? I
yeah,
think either of them would be a good signing on the right, and I think would strengthen what we need. And see, Semenyo can play both sides, and Embuemo can play down the middle or on the
yeah.
right, so they're both quite versatile. Eze, I love just
Oh
because,
man, yeah,
I think he's just super super talented. I think interestingly, his best position is probably inside.
yeah,
But I think there's a way that you fit him and Madison in, in certain games. You could play Eze off the left.
yeah.
There's different things you can do, right? So I think if we can make that happen, I'd love that to happen. I think we desperately need a proper number 6.
Desperately, yeah,
Um, I think you probably got to look at who's around as 6. There's links with Paulinho, who obviously was at Fulham, went to Bayern Munich, hasn't quite worked out. Douglas Luiz, who was at Villa, has gone
yeah.
to Italy and it hasn't quite worked out. I mean, if they played like they did in the Premier League, they're both very good options. I think they would both be good options there.
But I think if you're
Not
going
too
in the
expensive.
Champions League, Connor, you're talking about midfielders. Say Basuma goes, you could replace him
Yeah,
with Douglas Luiz. You could bring in Paulinho because you need that player anyway. So you could bring him in anyway, regardless, couldn't you? And then, mate, I'd be looking at letting Son go, and I'd be getting Eze in and saying, look, this is the guy that's going to replace him, and we're not going to just expect goals there. Yeah, we're gonna try and get goals from different places. If you get like the guys you're talking about on the right, and we actually start making chances for Dominic Solanke, so his goal return can come up. You got Johnson as a squad player who we know can score goals, and another thing with having, like we're talking about these midfielders, but when Bentancur used to play in that system, and if he's got a little bit of a platform behind him, I thought what a great footballer Bentancur was, But on the other side,
he was probably our second best player after Kane, wasn't he, during that era? So
yeah. You talk about Son, maybe Frank can manage him better. I mean, he's probably a bit old to get any more out of him, but with coaching in the way he says it may be different, but definitely that. And
I also think, to be honest, I think with all of our wingers, other than Odegaard, who probably does actually suit being a touchline winger, I think they're all being misprofiled, to be honest. I think we were playing touchline wingers when we've got everyone that we play out wide is better as an inside forward.
Yeah.
So Son is better if he's inside.
Tell.
Johnson is. Tell definitely would be.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of misprofiling going on, and I think just changing that will improve things. I'd love Adam Walton, but I don't think that's going to happen because I can't see Palace selling everyone, and they're going to ask for crazy money for him in that 6th position if you didn't go Pally, Douglas Luiz. Baleba at Brighton is another option at that number 6 position. But again, it's going to be crazy money. So, and then at the back, I don't think that there's not a huge amount of work that's needed at the back. To be honest, I think it's
unless
I
if
think it's squad depth
yeah,
unless
well,
Romero goes.
if Romero goes, I like Danzo, but I don't want Danzo to be that replacement. I
Completely
think
agree.
you need whatever you sell Romero for, you need to go and spend on a centre back. I mean, I don't think we're going to get him. I think he's got his sights set on bigger things. I like Gay. I think he'd be great for the club. I think he's captain material. I think he'd be fantastic. And then if you add him, Van der Ven, you got Ben Davis, who's obviously way down the pecking order, but as squad. Dan, like I said, Danzo. I even think that I know I said this on our show the other week, but if you had Dragusin, there will be a time and a place for him to play. There will. And like I was listening to a guy, it was on one of the podcasts, and he was saying that Ben Mee went to Brentford. Now everybody saw Ben Mee as a win the headers, clog the ball. They said by the time he was the year before he left Brentford, he was taking the ball off the keeper, bringing the ball out, playing it out to fullbacks because he'd been improved. So
and Dragusin might look better if he isn't having to play, 40 yards up the pitch, right?
yeah,
He's clearly a decent defender, and I think, as you say, obviously you just want that as squad depth anyway. And those times when Frank wants to move to three at the back, either
yeah,
Danso or Dragusin can come in, right? I think look, I'd rather not lose Romero because I think when
absolute best.
Romero wants to play and is committed, he's fantastic and he's a
Yeah,
leader and when he
he's our
wants
best
to be.
player probably.
Yeah, he is. Um,
Make him
but
captain.
obviously, yeah, I think that's what in my view, I think he's on 175, 180K a
Yeah,
week. I think you need to offer him over 200 grand a week and you say
yeah,
we're going to make you captain.
yeah. You're the leader.
Uh, yeah, and then because I think what people don't realise with Romero, if we lose him, is his ability on the ball
Oh yeah,
as a centre back is just outstanding, and I think you will lose so much in terms of build up and possession. It'll be a big miss. So yeah, we'll see. And yeah, I see one of the comments Kevin's made the point cover at fullback. I think obviously that's something we need.
well, got
You've got
Spence.
Spence, but I think you need a full.
Well, but as well, like I like Porro. I've always said if you say you were the three best footballers in the team, you're going Romero, Porro, Kulusevski, Madison, maybe. So that's four footballing wise. But he may not want that profile of. I mean, he might decide to play wing backs if we have Porro and Udogi. He might decide to play that to be our system. But yeah, but when you do look at fullbacks, then you've got Udogi, Spence can cover both. You've got Porro who's right back. Probably need more cover at fullback, don't you? Maybe one more who can play both, or one more who's a left back.
Yeah, and look, I think Porro and Udogi will definitely suit playing three at the back when we want to play that. So
Yeah,
that's great that they can both do that. And I think, to be honest, Udogi is someone I think is going to really benefit from Frank coming in
yeah,
because I always felt Udogi didn't quite suit when he was picking that ball up back to goal in the sort of
yeah.
inverted number 10 position. I think he'll be much better going on the outside,
Lord,
as a proper fullback.
yeah.
And I think he'll benefit a lot from Frank coming in.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, we're saying that it's a lot really, but I mean, Richarlison for me doesn't really let you down, but the biggest issue he has is availability. Now, I
100%.
don't think we've seen the best of Solanke. We've seen how hard he's prepared to work. We've seen, what he can do. We've seen he can score goals. We haven't, as a team, got the best out of him. I do think I would probably be looking at letting Richarlison go, and I would be looking for another goal scoring centre forward. I don't know who that is. Jonathan David, when you talk about him being on a free, scores goals. Someone who can challenge Solanke, even replace Solanke in the position where you're not sure which one's going to start, or do you know what I mean? Or each one
This
has a
could be an
period of
option.
time. So, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
some could be an option, but
I was having this chat earlier with my dad, and I was saying Visser could be an option, right? If
yeah,
Frank knows him, he scores goals, he can, you know, if you assume we're not going to get Mbeumo, obviously there's the point that Brentford don't want to lose their manager plus both of their forwards. But I think this we were linked with him in January anyway, actually pre-Frank, weren't we? And I don't know what his contract situation is, but I assume that probably means it's running down. So, I think he might be an option as a second, because look, I can't see the club going after just spending 60-odd million on Solanke. They're not going to spend big money on a number 9 because they see Solanke as the guy, even if we're not 100% sure yet. Although I think he's got more to give. So I think this is a good option. If they're talking 20 million for a Vissa, I think that's a better option than Richarlison is currently, to be honest, because of Richarlison's availability, as you say, and you'll get 20 million for Richarlison, wouldn't you, if you look.
Depending where he goes, if they talk of Everton, you'd get that from there, and then once again, if Saudi come in for him, you'd probably get a little bit more, wouldn't you? I mean, can you imagine if we let him go out to Saudi and he went to the team that Ivan Toney was at, and Ivan Toney come back? That'd be the dogs, wouldn't it? Having Toney and Solanke as your 2 options, I wouldn't mind that. But Grealish, any thoughts on Grealish?
1, I don't think it will happen because of the wages, but 2, I wouldn't want him anyway.
Yeah.
I think he's
got his flip-flops on.
Has been a great player, but I think he's on the decline, and I also just think he's not the right type of player we need. Anyway, I don't think he scores enough goals.
Yeah.
If he's going to take one of the 4 positions, and then if he's going to play inside, I think Maddison's better, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, how much would you? That would be a great option. That's the type of player we need. Someone who comes in and out the team, scores in mega important goals, and then sometimes gets a run, but sort of comes out the team and fights his way back. That's the type of player we need. That's the type of player.
Yeah, I think the problem with Jota himself is, again, he's a bit of a Richarlison in terms of availability, isn't he? He's always injured. So, I'll be interested to see what Liverpool do in terms of the striker. I suspect they probably, will look to sign a striker or a forward. I know they're obviously linked heavily with Wirtz for big money, but I think, they probably need a striker themselves as well.
Yeah. Anyway, Colin, we've done all right. Thank you for coming on and giving me the idiot's guide. I know you spoke about Frank on Friday. Thanks for the people that are in the chat now and who have been watching all night. Thank you very much. I know there's probably, I've come back from work today and I've been busy doing stuff and I've set the show up and I've come on here, but I can only imagine, I'll go and have a look actually when I get, because I think Love Island's on tonight, so I think my wife and my kids will start watching that, so that means I'll be left on my own for a couple of hours. But I can only imagine how much content you guys have had. Our lads did a show earlier today, but Mr. Levynomics himself, thanks for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it. You're going to get you back on soon? Get you back on soon?
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very, very happy to join again, and really enjoyed chatting. So thanks for that, Matt.
No, it's all right. And obviously, look, everyone, we like I said, we appreciate your time. We're going to be trying to put more content out. Hopefully, we'll be able to get more people, and it'll be a little easier if things start going in the right direction. But look, it's going to be a new era at Tottenham. Whatever your thoughts on the other manager, whoever comes in, probably going to be Frank now. It's not his fault that Ange was sacked. I just hope everybody gets behind the new manager. It's going to be tough. We're going to have ups and downs, but I'm positive. What about you?
I am
positive. Yeah,
I am. Yeah, I'm positive as we can be. Hopefully, we might get some more news this summer about a takeover. Let's see.
Well, what we'll do is, Connor, if we get some more news about that, we'll get you straight back on, because obviously you'll have much more of an idea than I would. So you can come and explain it to me, Leon and David, and we can ask our ridiculous questions and you can let us know. But apart from that, Con, all I've got to say, mate, is come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs. Thanks, Matt. Cheers, mate.